So with that, about 24 before 7, as I mentioned, the second of two special Veterans Day related features coming up. A few years ago, I worked with a television program called For Veterans Only. Was able to get that job because, of course, being an Air Force veteran, was able to help by co-anchoring, producing, and occasionally field reporting on veterans-related issues. This one was a fun one to produce, since this is what I did when I was in the military, was with the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. So if you were ever in the service stationed overseas, or you were a dependent of a service person stationed overseas, you know exactly how important the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service was when it came to making sure you had a little bit of touch of home wherever you were. So with that, let's go ahead and get into this. Once again, this was filed a few years ago. So I hope you enjoy it. It's on the AFRTS, the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service.
Hi, this is For Veterans Only, and I'm Ray Keaton. This week we're in California at the headquarters of the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. If you were ever in the military and stationed overseas, AFRTS is something that you'll probably remember very well. It was a touch of home to servicemen and women, and also their dependents, who were stationed at one of America's bases overseas in almost 60 countries. Well, AFRTS has come a long ways since its beginnings back in 1942, when it was born out of necessity. The early days of World War II, tough ones for the United States. Fighting in Europe was fierce, and in the Pacific, the U.S. was taking a beating. The morale of U.S. troops in both theaters was low. Sporadic mail deliveries from home helped, but still there was little timely and accurate information available to U.S. troops overseas on the progress of the war. While troops in Europe could at least listen to the BBC, those in the Pacific had nothing, except of course for Tokyo Rose, a less than reliable source of news and information. In May of 1942, however, U.S. troops around the world were thrown an information and entertainment lifeline, American Forces Radio.
In the South Pacific, of course, we start all these little stations, and then they would call themselves, typically American, the Mosquito Network, or the, you know, wonderful. Right. And they were Americans, and asserting their own personalities, their own independence. If the AFRS was theirs, and it was also the enlisted man's, you know?
Tom Lewis was drafted early in 1942 to set up and command the Armed Forces Radio Service. Its mission, quite simply, was to provide information and entertainment to U.S. troops overseas. According to Lewis, getting uncensored news and information to the enlisted man was the top priority.
The most important thing that he would get would be the news, undoctored news, so that he wouldn't hear a different thing from his family. And in this, that was the hardest thing to accomplish, absolutely hardest thing to accomplish.
The fight for uncensored news on AFRS was a tough battle, as was the appropriation of equipment and personnel, at a time when the nation was shifting into high gear in the production of guns, ships, and planes. He won both battles, though, and soon trained AFRS broadcasters began setting up operations where they were most needed.
We trained men to make the landings, so that from day one, they would have very crude and equipment, but they would have equipment to start a little radio station when they made the landing on that island.
So the seeds of Armed Forces Radio were planted, and in very little time began bearing fruit in the form of cooperation from the top stars and management of radio and the silver screen.
The GI Journal. It's the GI Journal. A lovely editor of your letters overseas, Linda Darnell.
Hello there, Kate. Tonight you're going to have a brand new editor for the letters from the men, because I'm leaving on a tour of Army camps overseas.
Oh, no fooling. Well, tell me, who's the new editor going to be?
Well, she's a very good friend of mine, and she's from MGM, and her name is Lucille Ball.
Hey, what am I going to get, a kiss or a quart of milk?
Mail call from the United States of America. Stand by, Americans. Stand by, servicemen of the United Nations. Mail call salute your home state. Miss Dorothy Lamour. Command Performance USA, the greatest entertainers in America, as requested by you, the servicemen and women of the United States Armed Forces throughout the world.
You know, the weather down there is like it is here. Of course, they have a light sprinkle now and then. Light sprinkle, that's South Pacific. For man the boats, boys, the island disappeared again. Well, look, they got an armed guard around the thing. Oh, look at this.
Well, all right, Bob. Is your griddle hot?
Yeah, I think so.
That'll do, Bob. Now, the steak, please. Oh, well, here it is, fellas. Beautiful. A porterhouse steak 3 inches thick. The only one in captivity.
You gonna give that a hot foot?
Into the frying pan.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. There you are, fellas. That's the sound of a steak sizzling.
Fellas, that's the steak. That's not me sizzling. That's the steak.
And, fellas, I wish I could cook a big steak for each and every one of you.
The pool of talent available to Armed Forces Radio was seemingly endless. Few big-name performers did not appear on AFRS. Being headquartered in Hollywood helped Armed Forces Radio in obtaining talent, but the biggest boost came from the industry's top agents.
These were people who had come into the service from the industry. And you really needed knowledgeable people like that to gather the talent. And so we had unlimited talent for programs in the early years. And, well, they did put together a marvelous group of talent. They had programs such as Command Performance, GI Journal, Mail Call, and lots of talent. Bob Hope. Well, you just name all the Hollywood talent. They came and performed.
So for about 3.5 years, Armed Forces Radio provided a morale boost and accurate information to U.S. troops fighting around the world. However, after the war, there was talk of having AFRS sign off the air permanently. In just a moment, we'll learn why that did not happen and why AFRS had to change its name. The fall of 1945 signaled the end to the fighting in World War II and was almost the curtain call for the Armed Forces Radio service. The war was over, and to some concerned, so was the mission of Armed Forces Radio. Fortunately, command officers at the Pentagon saw a continued need for the service in areas occupied by U.S. troops.
It became quite apparent that the mission of AFRTS, the bringing of news, the bringing of a piece of home to people in remote areas was absolutely essential.
Harris has worked with the system since 1948 and knows how important an American broadcasting service is to overseas troops. With the morale factor of American servicemen and women still a high priority, Armed Forces Radio is still alive and kicking.
This is Joe Rowland getting into it Monday, and let's get into it with a lot of luck. And trust me, this is from Ryan Cooter. Get your rhythm, Armed Forces Radio.
Joe Reiling is one of about 20 radio personalities who record daily or weekly shows for Armed Forces Radio. Joe does 5 shows a week and realizes the importance of what he does through audience feedback, often from vets who have heard his program overseas.
It's really the neatest thing that's going on. So when somebody comes back from Iceland or from the ADAX or from Korea, from the DMZ or anywhere, you know, it really is kind of neat to have somebody come in and say, hey, you know, listen, man, I listened to your show and really enjoy it. And believe it or not, again, it sounds stupid. That sounds kind of heartwarming, but it really is neat to have somebody say that, much more than somebody who has listened to me over the years at different stations here in LA. And that's the most fun about it, because you know that these guys, these people, are really into it because it means a lot to them.